So I'm never sure what people want to hear about the work. So I will ask people to sort of ask questions at the end. I wanted to talk a bit about how the work's come about. I thought that might be of some interest, and often people have this sort of misconception of my work that because I work with colour and the colours sort of balance off each other quite nicely, they think, oh well, it must be something that there's not much struggle for you when you do it, and that's actually the opposite. Every painting is really quite a hard-fought battle, and this exhibition was more difficult than they have been in the past, for several reasons. One of them was that there was a really big painting of mine from 2006 that was being acquired by the University of Wollongong, and it had some scratches on it that I needed to repair before they could get it. And I had it in my studio, and it's like, what is it, 150 high, 240 long. This is like the biggest thing I've ever done. And I did it in 2006, so it was a long time ago. And I had it in the studio for ages because it took them a while to pick it up. And at the same time, I took all the images that I had of the work I'd done over the last 20 years off a hard drive, off a computer that I had, put it onto a hard drive, and I looked through all the images. And so I was sort of, in my head in the studio, I was like haunted by old work in a weird way. And it's not that I was looking at it going, oh, I wish I could paint like that, or anything like that. But you kind of look at old work and you think, oh, wasn't that funny? I used to paint like that. There were techniques that I used. There was things that I did. I mean, I had this absolute, as just an example, I had this absolute love affair with this brush that all the bristle was gone until this tiny, tiny, tiny little amount of bristle that was left in it. And I used to make, I don't know, 70% of the marks on the painting was with this brush. I loved putting paint on and then pushing it about with this brush. And I was looking at all these little marks on it, I was going, oh, these tiny little marks, I remember making them. And you sort of remember, times in your life when you made all the paintings. And I was thinking, now I know why I don't do that anymore, because the brush died. But also you start thinking to yourself, was that a good technique to discard? Or, should I bring that back in? I used to scrape paint off a lot more during the painting process, and then put it on in other areas. I don't do that as much anymore. Should that be something that I'm incorporating? So you start sort of messing with your head. And already when you start doing, working towards an exhibition, and I don't sort of work towards an exhibition like I have some sort of overall theme or anything like that. It's just like I've had a show, that's done, the studio's empty, I get a whole lot of stretches, and I just start thinking about things that I want to paint. And it was exactly that time that both of these sort of Wayback Machines happened in my life. So I started to sort of second guess everything that I was doing. And I'm a firm believer that when you sort of overthink what you're doing and try and explain what you're doing, it leads to bad painting. And so for about maybe 4, maybe 5 months, I was just making work that I was completely unsatisfied with. Whether or not it was good or not, I don't know. I'd have to look back through photos that I took while, in the middle of making work. But the thing was, all of these paintings have lots of paintings underneath them. Some of them have more than others, and a lot of scraping back down, sanding down with coarse sandpaper, and then drawing it all back in and reworking. Some of them were almost kind of too painful to have in the show, because they just gave me hell for so long that although I thought that they're finished, I thought maybe I'm kidding myself, you know. So it was a really difficult show for me. And in the end, I've had a bit of time since they've been out of the studio. I've seen them up on the wall now, and I'm very happy with it. And I think there's been changes since the last show that I had here, and I'm very happy with the changes. So it all turned out okay in the end, but it is always a very difficult process. Sometimes when painting happens too easily, you look back on it and it's missed out on something because it didn't have a fight between you and the canvas. And it's funny because when I scrape them down, I am angry at them because they've let me down. So I am quite cranky at my own work, and I'm quite sort of a hard judge of my own work as well. That being said, I thought I'd tell you a bit about the process of kind of what they are and how they come to be. And they're all little kind of stories, and they're all made up. They're not real in a way, okay? Because I find images in all sorts of places. I've got a whole lot of Architectural Digest magazines from the 1960s that a friend sent me over from the United States. I screenshot things, I print out photos, I set up my own still lifes and things, I take photos of them. And you might notice there's a lot of, I'm mentioning photos a lot, and that is because I always used to work from life when I was younger. And then when I had a child, he would pull at, tablecloths and things like this. And so I just used to set them up, take photos quickly, and then take them down. And I thought, oh, well, you've got to do what you can do. You can't, keep doing the same thing when it's impossible. So I started to work from photographs, and I didn't like the change at first. But then I kind of got into it, and I thought, well, the good thing about a photograph is in your head, you don't feel like you've got to be completely accurate, because it's just a flimsy piece of paper here. So if you sort of draw up the scene and you think, I think I'll put a window in there, you feel more likely like you can do it. Whereas if it's an actual scene in front of you, you go, no, I've got to be, I've got to be genuine. I've got to make what's in front of me. And so I liked that, and I started to make paintings that were a combination of 1, 2, 3 different things. And sometimes when I make the painting, I'll just throw something in that I've got in the studio. I'll just put that in the painting as well. And so they sort of come from a place where they're fiction. And I thought I'd explain that a bit to you by sort of, maybe I'll pick this one, because that's like right here. So this came from an image that I found online of an interior. It looked a bit different than this, but that was your basic sort of structure of it. And then I started to play around with the colours, and I added some things that were from my real world rather than in the photograph. And then at one point, I put this in it, which is a sort of loose depiction of the big swimming pool that's in the centre of Budapest, right? And it's something my dad has as a poster. And so when I put that in, I suddenly started to think that maybe we're in Hungary somewhere, okay? And I started to think about where my dad used to go on holidays when he was a kid. His family were refugees from Hungary. They came to Australia in the 50s. And I remember he's always talking about Lake Balaton in Hungary and how, it was really beautiful there. And so I started to think of it as being sort of a house that's near the lake and there's like fruit trees outside and everything. And then the colour scheme started to turn into the tent that we had in the 1970s when I was a kid, which was an orange and brown tent with this floral curtains, right? And so, that started to happen. My mum's in the audience, she'll remember the tent. Yeah. And so that's what happened with the colour scheme and with that. And, you'll notice there's a lot of scraped out paint that then is painted over. So it had a lot of lives, sorry, I can't speak English anymore. A lot of lives in it before it became this tent Lake Balaton hybrid that it became in the end. And, they're all like this. I mean, that's from a photograph I took in Elizabeth Cummings' house when I went there for lunch once years ago. And I found the photograph and I thought, oh, I loved that, that table and everything like that. But as I started to paint it, I started to think of it as someone else's studio. Like, I started to think of it as someone's studio in like the 1900s and stuff. And then this, I can't even remember what it was on the table, but it was sort of a jar of pickles or something, So you start sort of inventing, and that's kind of how all of them come about, is this sort of invention. This was also from an image that I found that was of, it was a room, there was a bookcase. There was nothing on the walls, can you believe? There was just like one mirror or something there. But I started to put all these little paintings on the wall because I like doing paintings inside of paintings. I find that kind of really fulfilling and fun. And often I'll start them where I'll just get a pencil and just kind of draw something like automatic drawing. And then I'll look at what it's become and I'll think, what does that look like? And then I'll start painting it as whatever that looks like. So sometimes they become like a painting out of history, like that one has, the painting on the wall is Marie Laurencin, the artist's family. So it's a historical painting from, when was it, 1910 or 1902 or something. Anyway, it's an old painting, but I always liked the painting, and the kind of squiggles that I made with pencil sort of looked like a portrait of people. And so I looked up that painting and I put it on the wall. And then that had like a blue sky out there, and it was like trees or something. I can't remember what was outside a while ago. But I started to think, it'd be good if it was like this hill town, like outside Turin or something, and you're looking up at the Alps starting. And I thought it'd have to be sunset because, then you could get this glow going in the room. But that painting was painful. That maybe six times or something. I painted it over and over and over the top of each other. I don't know why it wouldn't work. There's just so many things that I had to redo. But then also I wanted to talk to you about how I sort of like to paint. I was telling someone before, I like to paint in the drawings and I like to draw in the paintings. If you walk around, you'll notice there's a lot of line work in the paintings. And it started off that I was wanting to make changes in a painting, and I didn't want to chicken out, so I would draw it in on the painting. So I wanted to change the composition dramatically, for example, move a table across, so I draw that in. and there'd be these lines left on the painting, and then I would have to paint up to those lines to, make those changes. And if I didn't do it, there'd be this terrible line work in the middle of the work, and often I'd go, okay, well, that needs to be bigger, that needs to be over there. So I'd make these lines, and I'd do like a whole stack of them, and then I'd start making the changes, and I'd do like 2 or 3 of the changes, but there might be like 4 or 5 changes that I'd thought I needed. But after 2 or 3 of them, the work would resolve, and I think, what do I do with this line work that I've got there? And I came back and had a look at the painting like the next day, and I was like, you know what? I don't mind it. I like having the lines in there. And so that just sort of opened the floodgates, and then I just started drawing all over them. Sometimes to make changes, sometimes just because I wanted to draw in them. And it's the same with those little drawings. I just wanted to put some paint in them. And I just started doing that. I thought, why have we got this sort of idea that you have to separate drawing and painting? Why can't you draw in paintings and paint in drawings? It's just a medium. It's not, So then I just started doing that, and I really got into it. And also in the big drawings, the big charcoal drawings, in I think 2012 or somewhere around that, I was overseas, and we were there for 2 months, and we sort of went around to a few places, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to paint because we had a 2-year-old child. We didn't want to take a lot of luggage. I didn't want to lug everything with me to paint, and so I just brought oil pastels with me. And I'd never really used oil pastels much before. And I bought a whole stack of sketchbooks with me, and I just started drawing in oil pastels, which I was really enjoying because you could get such beautiful, pure colour from them. But then I'd overwork some of the drawings, and I think, what do? You can't scrape it off, you can't do anything. And we were staying in this Airbnb place in Rome, and I searched through one of the drawers and I found some glue. And so I cut some sheets of the sketchbook out from the back, and I just cut out a square of paper, put glue all over it, and just stuck it over the top of the oil pastel in the bit that I'd overworked. And then I drew over it again, and I was like, don't mind that. So I just started using that as a technique while I was on holidays, and then there was all these drawings that were sort of, they had these sort of strange collage elements in them. And then when I came back, I was working in charcoal, and I thought, I wonder what that would look like if, the bits that I overwork, I don't rub out, I don't do anything, I just stick paper over the top of it in shapes that fit in with the drawing. And so I started to make changes in paper and then work over the top like that. And I noticed that it sort of fractured the space, and it brought things back, it brought things forward, it, did all sorts of things with the light, which I was happy with. But not only that, it meant that I could keep a drawing going for a long time if needed. So I started making these big drawings that I'd tape them to a big board, and I would have them in the studio, and I'd work on them once, then I'd work on them again, and then I'd work on them again. And sometimes I'd just keep them in the studio for months and just keep reworking them whenever I just thought they weren't quite right until they looked like something good. And you'll notice on the one on the left there, I can't remember what I called it, but when you see next to my signature, it says 24, and then there's a stroke and it says 25, because in 2024, I thought I'd finished it, and I'd actually taken it off the board and I'd weighted it down, and I was flattening it, getting it ready. I was going to get it framed and everything like that. And then I took it out to have a look at it, and I thought, you know what, needs a bit more work. So I taped it back onto another board and reworked it in 25. So the drawings actually take quite a long time as well. So I guess All I'm saying is they take a long time. Now, what else?
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Firstly, congratulations. It's a cracker of an exhibition. And
Thanks.
what it does for me is it highlights how sort of masterful, if we can use that word, that you are across different mediums. It's just amazing, and I guess that's all the decades of work. But I'm really curious to know at what point did you think I can make a go of this as an artist?
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question. Okay, so when I was at school, and I mean I've been drawing forever, and when I was at school, my mother can attest to this. She said that whenever I had an assignment or something, Mum, you remember, it was all drawing and very little writing in it, and the teachers would always be like, very good illustrations, not much content, right? And so that was what I was always doing. I always liked to draw. It was always my favourite subject was art. And then when I was in high school, had a very lovely art teacher who said, in the final 2 years, she said, look, this is the seniors' room. You can use it whenever you like to work on your major projects, stuff like that. And I'll never ask you where you're supposed to be. And so we used to spend huge chunks of the day in there, huge. And it was terrific because we could experiment. I painted for the first time in there. We were always drawing. We were always making work in there. So it wasn't like we were just smoking cigarettes or anything like that, And then at the end of high school, I thought, what can I do that's kind of like the senior art room, And it was like, art school. I go to art school. And then after art school, I was like, well, what can I do to keep this going? It was like, we get a studio, going in the studio. And I guess there was never anything else that I was wanting to do, not as badly as that. So yeah, that was it. And I also wanted to talk about like the first exhibition that I had at a commercial gallery, because it was kind of a funny story. I was obsessed with Mondrian, okay? So I thought I'd tell you something about myself that might sort of surprise you. I loved the grid. I loved blocks of colour, everything. And I was painting abstract paintings, so they were kind of loosely based around the grid, and they had a lot to do with colour. And so I started these works. I had sort of 12, 14 of them, something like that, all on the go. And they came out of these little tiny collages that I had started making that were all sort of based around blocks of colour, and they're all made with cardboard packaging that I'd cut up and I'd make into these things. I always like to experiment with materials, always have. And so then I started making all these paintings, and they were all in panels, and they sort of fit together in different ways. So then I'd make these compositions with them. My mum's still got a few at her place. And I was like 22 years old, and I was going to have my first show at Crawford Gallery in Liverpool Street. I don't know, maybe someone remembers it. Yeah, it was a long time ago. Anyway, and I had the work almost ready for the show. And then I was sitting in my share household kitchen, and I did a really good drawing of the kitchen. It was the bin was there, It was really banal subject matter. It was the bin, it was the spice rack, there was the sink, all sorts of things. But I really liked it. I thought, I'd show this drawing. And I thought, can I put it in the show? But then I looked at the work, and the work was all these grid things, And I thought, can't really put it in the show. And I thought, that's terrible. I made this and I can't put it in the show. The work has to change. So right then and there I thought, okay, I've got to work differently. And I thought, okay, cool. That's what I'll do. But I've got all the work now. I'll put it up on the wall. We'll see how we go, and the next show will be different. Yeah? And I already made that up in my mind, and it was clear as day. Anyway, put the show up on the walls, and it got got a really good review. Sebastian Smee came from the Herald. He reviewed the show. It was a glowing review. They sent a photographer, photographed me in colour, in the Herald, in colour, with the show, glowing review. I was like, shit, I'm never going to make another one of these paintings again. And they're really well received. But, you know, I was 22, so I thought, it doesn't matter, you know, doesn't matter. I'll just do what I want to do. So then I just spent years painting scenes of like buildings, traffic, you know, things like this. Really, I don't know. I've always had this love of like banal subjects, you know, like a whole lot of things on a table. That's probably where, you know, still life comes from for me as well. I just love that, you know, for all these ordinary little objects that you can have on a table, you can still get some sort of emotional feeling for them. And where does that come from, you know? And I always think it's kind of a two-way street. Of course, I'm putting something into it, but also the audience, you know, who looks at the work has to get something out of it. And whether the two are the same thing or not, well, it's not really important. It's just the fact that you get something out of it. It's like if you look at a work of art in history that everyone, you know, says is wonderful, you know, not my work, but, you know, something historical that's, you know, everyone. But you ask, you know, 10 different people what's so good about that, they'll give you 10 different responses. It'll never be exactly the same. And I think that's what it is about artwork that's so kind of enjoyable, is that it's a little personal response each person gets. And that's also, I mean, it's like you've got the oldest form of communication on the planet, or one of them anyway. It's certainly older than the written language. It's older than spoken language. You know, people were drawing things in the sand to explain things to someone, or, you know, on a cave wall, or, you know, they were drawing and painting are incredibly old, as well as, you know, dance, music, all of the arts really predate this spoken communication. And I think it's really amazing that even in the age that we're in now, people can still get something from the visual arts, you know, from drawing, from painting. And I think it's because it's got something that hits people on a personal level. And I think that's what's kind of good about it. And as someone who makes paintings, you kind of don't want to delve into your own work and why it is what it is and where it came from and all that too deeply, because you might kind of kill something in it that is, you know, that's interesting, that you're putting out into the world. So yeah, that's something I wanted to say about that. Now, if anyone's got any questions about specifics, I was going to do a walk around talk about some of the works. I guess I mentioned a few of them. If anyone's got any specifics they want to ask about various works or about the process in general, please yell out. Yes? Yeah.
So I know that you often in your interiors put the other paintings that you were saying earlier on the sand and so forth. And you also have a collection of works that you have to purchase so you can swap with other artists.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a terrific thing that artists do, and that should always be encouraged. So you said you start out with just a mark, and then it becomes something. But as it becomes something, does it become something that is reminiscent of an artist who you collect or you know or you're influenced by? And does that then influence how you do the rest of the painting?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. This had, that had like an Art Nouveau poster in it, but then it became a sort of portrait of a good friend of mine that passed away. So, you know, they sometimes become unusual things. Often they become works that I know. Sometimes I'll just make them some sort of random portrait that of someone that I have no idea, no conception of anything, but often they'll remind me of something and I'll try and look it up in a book or, you know, something that's on my wall. Like that's got a, above the sort of beach scene, there's the little Ildiko Kovacs that I have at my place. And that was my sort of funny rendition of her work, just in colours and marks. And, you know, people don't need to necessarily know exactly what the works are. They're just kind of a representation. Yeah. I like it when people make up what they think something is, because that's, you know, that means it's kind of, it's them using their imagination as well, which is part of the process, I think. Yes?
I'd like to just comment that I like your use of light. And
Okay.
particularly in that painting, I think it's very nice that it's all coming in the window that gets darker, away from the window. And the light in that one is gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
I think the lights, it was clever with light.
Yeah, I do love, more than light, I really love shadows. So I'm always looking at the colour of shadows wherever I am. If there's, you know, if there's something up, I'm always going, oh, that's kind of a dark blue. Isn't that an interesting shadow? So yeah, it's kind of, it's two things. You can't have light without shadow. You can't have shadow without light. So yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to ask you a question about composition.
Yeah.
Say this one, for instance, that
Yep.
you built on and built on. But did you have? Was that always going to be composition, regardless of the tenant and the memories and the, you know, what it became like?
The window was bigger.
Right.
This part came out to about there, and the plant was there. So the composition is always in flux in them. So there's always lines moving.
Even in something smaller like that one.
Like that one.
Yeah.
That one, yes, definitely, because it was more over here and there was more space here. But then and there wasn't much to do with any paintings that were stacked on the wall. So they're always shifting, and it's something that I really enjoy doing is doing radical shifts. I don't know why.
So when you're looking at your small, you know, your small work next to larger work,
Yeah.
they're slightly different, aren't they?
Oh yeah, they're always slightly different.
It's not, you've not painted that small one and then painted from that painting.
No. And often I'll paint the small ones in the middle of painting a big one. And the same with the little sort of colour studies. I'll in the middle of something, I won't know what colours to use in it, so I'll start putting colours next to each other. And sometimes I'll put one colour that I think, I wonder if the background should be that colour. And I thought, I wonder if that colour looks good with that colour. I thought, it looks good. And you know what looked good with that? This colour as well, you know. So I'll start kind of, yeah. So it's like a colour swatch. It's just a sort of a fun way of working stuff out in my head, which is part of it. Yes.
I had a question about this one.
Yes.
There's that very bold orange that goes from the wall into the table.
Yeah.
It sort of plays with like the surface and the form, like the space in the painting.
Yeah.
Was that intentional?
Well,
It's like a very strong like visual theme that sort of, you know, goes from the wall into the table, even though they're two separate things.
yeah, I do actually like having like one red with another red, one green with another green, one orange with another orange, that sort of thing, to kind of build on the intensity of an orange. Like, it's not just, I mean, it's an orange that I've mixed, but it's not just straight. It's got like burnt sienna and stuff in it too. So if you actually isolated it, it's probably not that bright, but because there's several oranges, it intensifies the hue of all the oranges. So I often change colours a lot during a painting. So I can't remember what I had in the background here, but there was something else. This was a different colour, I know that for sure. But then I started to sort of get a real orange thing going with it. And I don't know why, but I mean, there's a fair amount of orange in this show. And it's funny because a friend of mine who comes over, he's a painter too, and he looks at my work and he goes, wow, I can see the color palette for this show, but it's not something that I really, pre-thought. I didn't think, this show, it's all going to be orange. It's going to be orange and blue and grey, I didn't sort of think that out. But then you kind of look at it when it's all up on the wall and you go, okay, I used a lot of that and that and that. And, there was a show I had here one year and it was really pink. And I was just like, wow. And so for the next year, I was just like, I'm not touching pink, I really over-pinked that show. So, you kind of have these reactions to your own work as well, which is funny. I'll go with you first.
How do you know when to stop? Is there a checklist of things, or you just walk in and go, okay, that's done, put it to the side? How do you decide?
Okay, well, that's a really good question because that is something that is always on your mind. And there's a few different things. One of them is that I had, I don't know if everyone knows the painter Aida Tomescu. Anyway, I had Aida as a painting teacher in second year. And she was a real hard taskmaster. She was a terrific teacher. And she said, look, why did you make that, why did you make that change? And I said, well, it needed something in there. And she said, no, you wanted to keep painting because the painting was starting to work. And I was like, yeah. And she says, well, when a painting's starting to work and it makes you excited to keep working on it, it's probably got all the energy in it that it needs, and anything you start adding to it is just killing that energy. And she said, and it's all right if there's an area like in the top right-hand corner or something like, it's not working for you, or you think it's not right and you need to change it, everything. If it's starting to cook and you think it's a good painting, don't make that change, because probably in a few months' time, you'll look back at that painting and you go, I didn't need to change that, that's fine. So it's funny that all those years ago, it was like 1992, she said that, and it's always in my mind, is that if you start going, ooh, this is starting to work, maybe just leave it. And so often I just leave them for a few days or even a week, and I'll work on other things instead of bashing it out, trying to get, because also the human brain wants to make everything even and regular. Okay, so when you've got something that's working, but it's working in a non-regular kind of way, you want to make it structurally even and have everything balanced and all of this, and that usually leads to quite a boring painting. So I've got those two ideas and then the third thing that is also something is my studio is downstairs. I've got sort of the downstairs and then we live upstairs. And if I've got a painting that I'm sort of thinking, ooh, this is going all right, there's something happening, not sure what it is, but there's something interesting happening, and I go, okay, I'm going to go and have a cup of tea. So I go upstairs, have a cup of tea, and I'm just like dying to sneak down and have a look at it, because I'm not sure what's going on in there. And if I'm just sitting on the stairs just looking at it going, because from the stairs to the easel, it's a long way. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it going, what on earth is happening with this painting? And if it's giving me that, it's just like a weird sort of alien, that's good, and leave it. So yeah, that would be my answer. Yes?
Two little questions. The first kind of follows from those two, like your friend mentioning he was seeing a theme of like pink showing up or whatever, is about staying siloed with your work or seeking feedback, mentorship, or whatever, or if you're trying to keep closed door on it. And,
Well, you go through stages. So often when I'm right in the middle of the work for a show, I really, really want some feedback, but I never know who to ask, because some people might be too complimentary and not sort of telling you the things that are going wrong. Other people might have a completely different idea of what paintings and drawings look like, and so they're not much help either. I find my wife is actually fabulous, because she knows my work and has known it for ages, And I only ever ask her to have a look at something if I think it's finished when she's not really in the mood. If she's in a really good mood, she'll come down and go, yeah, that's great, right? But if she's in a bad mood, she'll come down. I go, can you just have a look at something? She says, I've had a shit day. I really don't want to, and I say, just a quick look. Just have a quick look at it, And she'll come down and she'll go, yeah, it's great, right? And I think, it is. It must really be okay. Or she'll go, no, because she's in a bad mood already. So she's good. So that's who I go to for feedback.
Second little question was
Yeah.
just what technique is exciting? I know there was one hand brush, but like what are you excited to keep exploring, or what do you think maybe is drawing you now?
I've been working on landscapes, which, I did a lot of landscapes, 5-10 years ago. I always do a few landscapes, but I haven't been really focused on landscape for a while. But since completing this show, I've just been sort of doing landscapes. So, yeah, that's it. Did you put your hand up? No, you're just scratching your ear. All right, is that all the questions? You got another question or we finished?
No, I do, but
Yeah, one more question, yes.
John, first of all, congratulations on the show. What I wanted to ask you is some of the works have got smaller studies beside them. And what I find fascinating in those instances is that there doesn't appear to be any loss of technique in moving from a smaller work to a larger work. And I think for a lot of people who paint, they might be able to paint quite competently, say at a smaller scale. As soon as they move to a larger canvas, it's gone. So could you talk to that a little bit?
Okay. You have to, the most important thing you have to do is just scale up the equipment that you use. So you put away the smaller brushes and you bring out the bigger brushes when you're working on a bigger painting. Because you've got to cover greater areas. You also got to set out more paint in, bigger amounts of paint. So basically, it's the same as making a small painting. You're just using bigger implements and more paint. It's about as simple as you can make it, really. But yeah, it does take a long time, because when I was younger, I found it very difficult to make big paintings. But now I really love big paintings. So they're sort of as fun as small paintings, but just take a lot longer.
But the actual physical experience of painting must also change, not just the brushes and the amount of paint, because the mark making.
Oh, they're more immersive.
In the studies is also there in larger works.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people, I don't know, they don't seem to be able to achieve that.
It takes ages. Yeah. Like, I couldn't do big paintings for a long time. So, yeah. No worries.
So, is that all the questions?